stall. He'd have been rather a handful in this hole of a place." He shoved his way out of the yard in front of me, seemingly quite comfortable and at home upon the descendant of the mountain hare, and I followed as closely as drunken carmen and shafts of erratic carts would permit. Kruskin evinced a decided tendency to turn to the right on leaving the yard, but she took my leftward tug in good part, and we moved on through the streets of Drumcarrowan with a dignity that was only impaired by the irrepressible determination of Mr. Shoot's new trousers to run up his leg. It was a trifle disappointing that Kruskin should carry her nose in the air like a camel, but I set it down to my own bad hands, and to that cause I also imputed her frequent desire to stop, a desire that appeared to coincide with every fourth or fifth public house on the line of march. Indeed, at the last corner before we left the town, Miss Bennet's mare and I had a serious difference of opinion, in the course of which she mounted the pavement and remained planted in front of a very disreputable public house, whose owner had been before me several times for various infringements of the Licensing Acts. Bernard and the corner boys were of course much pleased. I inwardly resolved to let Miss Bennet know how her groom occupied his time in Drumcarrowan. We got out into the calm of the country roads without further incident, and I there discovered that Kruskin was possessed of a dromedary swiftness in trotting, that the action was about as comfortable as the dromedary's, and that it was extremely difficult to moderate the pace. "I say, this is something like going," said Bernard, cantering hard beside me with slack rein and every appearance of happiness. "Do you mean to keep it up all the way?" "You'd better ask this devil," I replied, hauling on the futile ring snaffle. "Miss Bennet must have an arm like a prize fighter. If this is what she calls confidential, I don't want her confidences." After another half mile, during which I cursed Flurrynox and registered a vow that Philippa should ride Kruskin in a cavalry bit, we reached the crossroads at which Bernard's way parted from mine. Another difference of opinion between my wife's hunter and me here took place, this time on the subject of parting from our companion, and I experienced that peculiar inward sinking that accompanies the birth of the conviction one has been stuck. There was still some 8 miles between me and home, but I had at least the consolation of knowing that the brown mare could easily cover it in 40 minutes. But in this also disappointment awaited me. Dropping her head to about the level of her knees, the mare subsided into a walk as slow as that of the slowest cow, and very similar in general style. In this manner I progressed her for a further mile, breathing forth, like St. Paul, threatenings and slaughters against Bobby Bennet and all her confederates; and then the idea occurred to me that many really first-class hunters were very poor hacks. I consoled myself with this for a further period, and presently an opportunity for testing it presented itself. The road made a long loop round the flank of a hill, and it was possible to save half a mile or so by getting into the fields. It was a short cut I'd often taken on the Quaker, and it involved nothing more serious than a couple of low stone gaps and an infantine bank. I turned Kruskin at the first of these. She was evidently surprised. Being in an excessively bad temper, I beat her in a way that surprised her even more, and she jumped the stones precipitately and with an ease that showed she knew quite well what she was about. I vented some further emotion upon her by the convenient medium of my cane, and galloped her across the field and over the bank, which, as they say in these parts, she fled, without putting an iron on it. It was not the right way to jump it, but it was inspiriting; and when she had disposed of the next gap without hesitation, my waning confidence in Miss Bennet began to revive. I cantered over the ridge of the hill, and down it towards the cottage near which I was accustomed to get out onto the road again. As I neared my wonted opening in the fence, I saw that it had been filled by a stout pole, well fixed into the bank at each end, but not more than 3 feet high. Kruskin pricked her ears at it with intelligence. I trotted her at it and gave her a whack. Ages afterwards there was some one speaking on the blared edge of a dream that I was dreaming about nothing in particular. I went on dreaming, and was impressed by the shape of a fat jug, mottled white and blue, that intruded itself painfully, and I again heard voices, very urgent and full of effort, but quite outside any concern of mine. I also made an effort of some kind. I was doing my very best to be good and polite, But I was dreaming in a place that whirred and was engrossing, and daylight was cold and let in some unknown unpleasantness. For that time the dream got the better of daylight. And then, apropos of nothing, I was standing up in a house with someone's arm round me. The mottled jug was there, so was the unpleasantness, and I was talking with most careful old world politeness. "Sit down now. You're all right," said Miss Bobby Bennet, who was mopping my face with a handkerchief dipped in the jug. I perceived that I was asking what had happened. "She fell over the stick with you," said Miss Bennet. "The dirty brute!" With another great effort I hooked myself on to the march of events, as a truck is dragged out of a siding and hooked on to a train. "Oh, the Lord save us!" said a grey-haired woman who held the jug. "You're destroyed entirely ashore. Oh, glory be to the merciful will of God! My heart leapt across my chest when I seed him under the horse." "Go out and see if the trap's coming," said Miss Bennet. "He should have found the doctor by this." She stared very closely at my face, and seemed to find it easier to talk in short sentences. "We must get those cuts looking better before Mrs. Yates comes." After an interval, during which unexpected places in my head ached from the cold water, the desire to be polite and coherent again came on me. "I'm sure it was not your mare's fault," I said. Miss Bennet laughed a very little. I was glad to see her laugh. It had struck me her face was strangely haggard and frightened. "Well, of course it wasn't poor Kruskin's fault," she said. "She's nearly home with Mr. Shute by now. That's why I came after you." "Mr. Shute?" I said. "Wasn't he at the fair that day?" "He was," answered Miss Bobby, looking at me with very compassionate eyes. "You and he got on each other's horses by mistake at the hotel, and you got the worst of the exchange." "Oh!" I said, without even trying to understand. "He's here within, your honour's ladyship, Mrs. Yates, ma'am," shouted the grey-haired woman at the door. "Don't be unaisy, of course. He's doing grand. Sure, I'm telling Miss Bennet, if she was his wife itself, she couldn't give him better care." The grey-haired woman laughed. Chapter 8